It was a typical Thursday evening, the kind of evening that seemed calm on the surface, but deep down, I always felt there was a quiet, persistent tension in the air. I had been married to Ryan for 4 years now, and while I loved him with all my heart, there was always something unsettling about his relationship with his mother Grace. It wasn't anything overt, just subtle comments, small gestures, the way she would show up uninvited to our house, even when Ryan and I were in the middle of something. Over the years, I had learned to keep my distance from Grace. She was sweet to my face, always polite and charming, but underneath it all, I couldn't shake the feeling that she saw me as an intruder in her son's life. That evening, I had just finished making dinner. Ryan had been working late, and I had the house to myself for a few hours. I decided to relax in the living room, catching up on a book I had been meaning to finish for weeks. The soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the house, the peaceful kind of quiet that only comes when you're alone. But then I heard it. At first, I thought I was imagining things. It was faint, just a whisper, but there was no mistaking the voices. I knew Ryan was home, and I had heard the sound of his car in the driveway just a few minutes earlier, but I hadn't expected Grace to be here too. I wondered if maybe she had come by to drop something off, but the way they were talking, it wasn't casual. It wasn't a friendly chat. I wasn't intentionally eavesdropping. I just happened to be sitting in the living room, and the voices floated through the air, clear enough for me to catch snippets of the conversation. They were sitting in the kitchen, not far from where I was, and I could tell by their tone that something was off. It was low, almost conspiratorial, the kind of conversation that made my stomach tighten. "She's getting too comfortable." Grace's voice was sharp, almost cold. "You've let her run the house for too long, and look where it's gotten us. We're practically strangers now. This isn't how it's supposed to be." I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I pressed my back into the couch, trying to make myself as still as possible, my book forgotten in my hands. Grace had always been a bit overbearing, but this was different. There was no way she was talking about anything minor. I strained my ears to hear more. Ryan's voice followed, and for a moment I thought I detected a hint of uncertainty. "I don't know, Mom. I don't want to hurt her feelings. She's my wife." "She's not your mother," Grace snapped. "And that's the problem, isn't it? You're putting her needs first, and what about yours? What about us? What about me?" Ryan was quiet for a moment, and my heart began to race. I had never heard him speak to his mother like that. He was always so careful around her, trying to keep the peace. But this felt different. "Look," Ryan said, his voice lowering, "I'm just trying to make things work, okay? I know we've been distant lately, but I don't know if kicking her out is the answer." I swallowed hard. "Kicking me out?" The words hung in the air, and the full weight of their conversation began to sink in. My chest tightened as I heard Grace's voice again, this time laced with something darker. "You need to think about what's best for you, Ryan. You've always been a mama's boy, and I've always supported you. But now, she's getting in the way. She doesn't fit in with this family. You're losing control, and it's time to take charge of your life again." I felt a rush of emotions flood through me. Shock, anger, confusion. My mind raced. They were talking about me. Ryan and Grace were talking about ways to get me out of the house. I wasn't imagining it. They were plotting, and I was the target. For a moment I felt paralyzed. I didn't know what to do. Should I confront them right now? Should I walk in there and demand an explanation? No, I couldn't. I needed to be sure. I needed to understand the full extent of what was happening before I made a move. I had to stay calm. I wasn't going to let my emotions get the best of me. I listened as Grace's voice continued, her words sharper now, almost biting. "You've put up with her for far too long. She doesn't appreciate everything you've done for her. You deserve better, Ryan. You deserve someone who understands you, someone who knows how to run a home and take care of you." I clenched my fists, feeling a wave of anger surge through me. I had always been respectful to Grace, always tried to make her feel welcome in our home. But this was a betrayal. It felt like they were treating me as if I didn't even belong in my own house. Ryan's voice was quieter now, more hesitant. I don't know. I don't want to be the bad guy. You're not the bad guy, Grace insisted. You're doing what's right. And once she's out of the picture, things will go back to normal. You'll see. My mind was racing. I wanted to scream, to confront them both right then and there, but I knew I had to stay composed. I had to think this through carefully. The last thing I wanted was to make a scene or do something I'd regret. I had to figure out my next move. I slowly stood up from the couch, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. I had heard enough. I couldn't trust them anymore, not without knowing more. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. But I also needed to be smart about this. If I confronted Ryan now, what would I say? How could I prove that I wasn't overreacting? I moved quietly toward the kitchen, listening for any more signs of their conversation, but by the time I reached the hallway, I could hear nothing but the soft hum of the refrigerator again. I peeked around the corner into the kitchen. Ryan was sitting at the table, his head down, looking lost in thought. Grace was standing by the window, arms crossed, staring out into the yard. There was no sign that they had been plotting just moments ago. I took a deep breath and walked into the living room. My heart was racing, but I forced myself to remain calm. I had to be patient. I couldn't let them know that I had overheard everything. If I did, they'd know that I knew what they were up to, and I didn't want to give them the upper hand. But now I was more determined than ever to get to the truth. I sat back down on the couch, trying to calm my nerves. My mind kept replaying the conversation, each word echoing in my thoughts. I didn't know how I was going to handle this, but I couldn't just let it go. I wasn't going to let Grace or anyone else push me out of my own home. I had to fight for myself. As I sat there, I thought about my options. I could confront Ryan now, but I wasn't sure if he'd be honest with me. Or I could give it some time, gather more information, and approach him with solid evidence. But how could I be sure that he wouldn't just lie to me, the way he had lied to his mother? The anger I had felt earlier was starting to give way to a sense of determination. I wasn't going to let them win, not without a fight. I would protect myself, protect my place in this house, and find a way to turn this around. But the most important thing was that I wouldn't be naive anymore. I would not let anyone, not even my husband, take me for granted. If they wanted me out, they were going to have to work for it, and I would make sure that I was prepared for whatever came next. The days after overhearing that conversation were a blur of confusion, anger, and suspicion. I didn't know what to believe. Part of me wanted to trust Ryan. He had always been kind and loving, or at least I thought he had been. But the other part of me felt betrayed, as if I were standing on the edge of a precipice, unsure of whether I should step forward and face the truth, or pull back into the safety of ignorance. I couldn't just confront him immediately. I needed to be sure, to gather concrete evidence so that when the time came to talk to him, I wouldn't be at a disadvantage. If they had been planning something, I had to find out just how far they were willing to go, and how deeply entrenched the betrayal really was. I couldn't let myself spiral into paranoia, but I also couldn't ignore what I had overheard. It was a gut feeling now, a creeping certainty that something was off between Ryan and Grace. Maybe it wasn't just the conversation. Maybe it had been there all along, simmering beneath the surface. It wasn't like they were overtly rude to me or made blatant remarks. No, it was subtler. Those small moments that seemed off, the way Grace always had an opinion on how things should be done in our house, the way Ryan for some reason deferred to her at the drop of a hat. It was like I wasn't part of the equation. The next morning I found myself pacing around the house, trying to decide on my next step. Should I search through his things? Should I snoop through his phone? It felt wrong, invasive, but I needed to know. If I had any chance of defending myself or holding my ground, I needed more than just a vague, overheard conversation. I had to get to the heart of the matter. I tried to act as normal as possible when Ryan came downstairs for breakfast. His usual cheerful demeanor was the same, though I couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something from me. He greeted me with a kiss on the cheek and a casual, "Good morning, babe," but I could tell his mind was elsewhere. Was it guilt, or was he just preoccupied with something else? Either way, it didn't matter. I wasn't going to let this go. I needed answers. I spent the next couple of days observing him closely. I took mental notes of his behavior, his mannerisms, his interactions with his mother, and even the subtle changes in his tone when he spoke to me. He was being distant, but not in an obvious way. More like an invisible wall had gone up, one I couldn't quite touch, but I could feel it. He wasn't outright avoiding me, but his responses were shorter, more distracted. When we spoke, it was as if his mind was elsewhere, constantly drifting off, and when I asked him about his day or what he'd been up to, he would shrug it off and say something vague, like, "Just work stuff," or "Nothing exciting." I knew I had to keep my distance too, at least for a while. I couldn't afford to act like I was suspicious, not yet. If I confronted him too early, there was a chance he would shut me out, tell me I was overreacting, or worse, accuse me of mistrusting him for no reason. The last thing I wanted was to seem paranoid, especially when I didn't have anything concrete to go on. So I kept things casual, pretending that everything was fine, all the while gathering the pieces of the puzzle. I began to notice more inconsistencies in Ryan's behavior. Small things. For instance, there was one evening when I came home earlier than usual, expecting him to be there since he had mentioned he would be working from home. But when I walked into the house, I found him sitting in the living room alone, scrolling through his phone. His mother, Grace, wasn't there. I had thought he was expecting her, so I didn't think much of it at first. But when I asked where she was, he seemed caught off guard. "Oh, she had to go home early," he said almost too quickly. "Something came up." I nodded and let it go. But it didn't sit right with me. There was a slight hesitation in his voice, and when I glanced at the phone in his hand, I saw that he quickly minimized the screen and slid the phone into his pocket. I hadn't seen anything incriminating, but the sudden movement made me suspicious. Why had he hidden his phone so fast? Was he texting her? Was he communicating with his mother more than he had been letting on? My mind was racing again. That night, after Ryan went to bed, I sat up in the living room, my thoughts spinning. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeper going on. Maybe it was paranoia, but I had to do something. I needed evidence. I started with the easiest target, Ryan's phone. I knew it was a breach of privacy, but I didn't see any other option. As quietly as I could, I grabbed his phone from the side of the bed where he had left it charging. He had passed out quickly, as he often did, and I knew he wouldn't wake up for hours. I unlocked the phone. He had always kept it simple, a 4-digit PIN that I had memorized over time. The screen lit up, and I immediately went into his text messages. At first, there was nothing alarming, just normal texts between him and his friends, messages about work, and some family group chats. But then I saw it. A thread of messages from Grace. The first few were innocuous enough. They talked about normal things like groceries and upcoming visits. But as I scrolled down, the tone began to shift. The last message sent by Grace was worrying. "I'm telling you, it's time to get rid of her. It's not going to work out if you keep letting her run things. You have to do what's best for you." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. It wasn't just a one-off comment. There was something more to it. She had been feeding him these ideas for a while now. I kept scrolling, trying to find more messages, hoping for more insight. Sure enough, I found another thread. This one with Ryan responding to her. I know. It's just hard. She's my wife, Mom. I can't just do that." Grace's response was quick and cutting. "Stop being weak. You have to take control of your life again. She's gotten too comfortable. It's not healthy." My heart sank as I read those words. This wasn't just an occasional conversation. This was an ongoing discussion. Ryan and his mother were in on this together. I was the problem, and they had been talking about ways to get rid of me. I felt sick to my stomach, but I couldn't stop now. I needed more. I scrolled through the rest of the messages, but they only confirmed what I had already suspected. There was no going back now. They had been plotting behind my back, and I had the proof. I gently put the phone down, trying to calm my racing thoughts. I was shaken, but I knew I had to act carefully. I couldn't rush into anything. I needed to approach this the right way. The next morning, I had to act as if nothing had changed. Ryan was still the same, pretending everything was normal. I tried to stay calm and not let the anger show on my face, but I couldn't help it. I was devastated. My trust in him had been shattered. I had never imagined that the person I loved, the man I married, would be capable of conspiring with his mother to undermine me. I had the evidence I needed, but now the question was what to do with it. Should I confront him right away? Or should I wait, give him a chance to come clean on his own? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that there was no way I could just let this go. I needed answers, and I needed them now. But before I could make a decision, something inside me told me to wait. I had everything I needed to make my case, but timing was everything. If I confronted Ryan too soon, he might deny it, or worse, turn the tables on me, accusing me of invading his privacy. I had to approach this carefully. For now, I would keep watching, gathering more information if I could, and when the time was right, I would confront him with everything I had. But it wouldn't just be a confrontation. It would be my stand, my declaration that I wouldn't be pushed aside, not by him, not by anyone. The weight of the evidence I had gathered weighed heavily on me. I spent the days following my discovery in a kind of suspended state, my thoughts in turmoil. Every moment with Ryan felt like a carefully crafted performance, as if I were a character in a play, and he was the director calling the shots. The warmth I had once felt when he kissed me good morning or asked about my day had turned into something distant and hollow. His presence was a constant reminder of the betrayal I now carried in my heart, yet I couldn't let on. I couldn't let him see the storm raging inside me until I was ready to face him head-on. Ryan continued to act as if nothing was wrong, going about his day as if we weren't on the verge of a major turning point in our relationship. He was affectionate in the way he always had been, light-hearted, playful, sometimes too caught up in his own world to notice my discomfort. He hadn't realized that the distance between us had already grown so vast that I no longer knew how to reach him. Grace, too, carried on with her usual routine, showing up at our house uninvited, offering unsolicited advice, and always trying to create a space for herself between Ryan and me. It was the small things. How she always acted as if our relationship was secondary to her bond with him, as if he still needed her approval for everything. And it was becoming increasingly obvious that she was manipulating him, planting seeds of doubt in his mind. I had to face it. I was being pushed out of my own life. I couldn't wait any longer. I had the proof, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't let this situation fester any longer. I had to confront him, no more running from the truth. But I knew it wouldn't be simple. This wouldn't be just a matter of talking. It would be a confrontation, a negotiation for my place in our home and our future. I spent the night preparing, going over every possible scenario in my head. What if he denied it all? What if he defended his mother, claimed I was overreacting, or worse, turned the blame on me? I couldn't let that happen. I had to be strong and stand my ground. This wasn't just about saving our marriage. It was about saving myself. The next evening, as I prepared dinner, I could feel the tension building inside me. The house, which once felt like a safe haven, now felt cold and distant. When Ryan came through the door, his usual cheery smile faltered when he saw my expression. I had purposely kept my distance all day, letting him sense that something was wrong. I needed him to understand that this wasn't a small issue. "Hey, what's going on?" he asked, his voice laced with concern, though I could still sense the hesitation in his tone. "Sit down," I said quietly, gesturing to the dining table. He frowned, but sat down across from me. You're scaring me. What's going on? I took a deep breath. I had to remain calm, not let the emotions that had been bubbling under the surface take over. I wasn't going to break down. I was done crying over things I had no control over. It was time to face the truth, no matter how painful. "Ryan," I began, my voice steady but firm. "I need you to be honest with me. We need to talk about something important, something that's been bothering me for a while." He looked confused but nodded. "Okay, I'm listening." I looked him in the eyes, making sure he saw the seriousness in my gaze. "I overheard a conversation between you and your mother a few days ago. A conversation where you two were plotting how to get me out of the house." His face instantly fell. The color drained from his cheeks, and for a moment he looked as though the air had been knocked out of him. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. It was clear I had caught him off guard. "I know what you've been planning," I continued, my voice now harder, more resolute. "I read the messages between you and her. You were both talking about getting rid of me, pushing me out of our home. And I need you to explain yourself." He opened his mouth again, but this time he spoke. "Wait, you read my messages? How could you do that?" I felt a surge of anger, but I controlled it. "Don't try to make this about me invading your privacy. This isn't about my actions, this is about yours. About what you and your mother have been conspiring to do to me. So stop playing the victim, Ryan, and explain yourself." He stood up abruptly, pacing around the room. He looked agitated, his hands running through his hair as if he didn't know what to say. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't—" He stopped mid-sentence and ran a hand over his face in frustration. I didn't back down. "Then explain to me what happened. Why would you even think about this, Ryan? What kind of plan is this? Why would you let her convince you that I don't belong here?" He turned and looked at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You don't understand, do you? It's not like that. Don't you dare try to justify this," I interrupted. "You and your mother have been discussing behind my back how to get me out of my own home. Don't tell me I don't understand." I stood up now, feeling my own emotions swirling inside me. "I loved you, Ryan. I trusted you. But now I find out that you've been plotting with her like this?" He looked like he wanted to say something, but words failed him. It was clear he was struggling, torn between the truth and the guilt that had taken over him. "It's not like you think," he said finally, his voice soft, almost pleading. "I never wanted you to leave. I never wanted things to get like this, but it's just been so hard, okay? The tension between us, between me and you and my mom, I don't know how to fix it. I don't know what to do anymore." I took a deep breath, trying to understand his words, trying to process his emotions. "Ryan," I said, my voice softer now, "you don't need to fix anything by getting rid of me. I'm not the problem here. You need to stand up to her. You need to set boundaries, not just with me, but with your mother. You can't keep letting her control everything." His eyes flickered with a mixture of guilt and confusion. "But I've always depended on her. She's always been there for me. She's my mother." "I know," I said, "but that doesn't give her the right to push me out of our life. And it doesn't give you the right to ignore how I feel. You have to make a choice, Ryan. You can't keep trying to please her and me at the same time. It doesn't work that way." He was silent for a moment, looking lost, like a man on the edge of a precipice. "I don't want to lose you," he whispered. I stepped closer to him, my heart aching. "Then show me. Show me that you can make a choice for us. Show me that you can stand up for me. That's all I need. I don't want to be in a relationship where I'm second place to your mother. I need to feel like I matter." He looked at me for a long time, his eyes full of emotion. "I don't know if I can," he admitted, his voice cracking. "You can," I said softly, "but it's going to take time, and it's going to take effort. And if you're not willing to put in that effort, Ryan, then maybe we need to rethink what we're doing here." He looked away, clearly torn. The silence between us was suffocating, but I knew that it was necessary. I had drawn a line in the sand, and now I had to see if he was willing to cross it. After what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "I'll try. I'll try to make things right. I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you." I nodded, my heart heavy. I didn't know if this was the end or the beginning of something new. But I had made my stand. I had told him how I felt, and now it was up to him to prove that he could put me first, to prove that our marriage meant more than whatever hold his mother had on him. The conversation wasn't over, not by a long shot, but at least it was a start. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a small flicker of hope. The days after my confrontation with Ryan were an emotional roller coaster. I had put everything on the table, laid bare my hurt and my fears, and now I was left waiting, hoping, and yet still uncertain of what the future would hold. Ryan's promise to try was both a balm and a source of anxiety. It wasn't the certainty I had hoped for, but it was a start. It meant he was willing to put in the effort, or at least that's what I tried to tell myself as I moved through the motions of daily life. In the beginning, things felt different. Ryan was more present, more attentive, almost as though he were trying to make up for the months of emotional distance. He made more of an effort to be around, offering to help with things around the house and initiating conversations that didn't revolve around work or his mother. He even apologized multiple times, though each time the apology felt as though it were coming from a place of guilt rather than true understanding. Still, I tried to let it go. The first step had been made. He was trying. But then the cracks began to show. Grace continued to insert herself into our lives, despite Ryan's promises to set boundaries. She would call unannounced, drop by whenever she felt like it, and even offer unsolicited advice in ways that I couldn't ignore. Each time, Ryan seemed uncomfortable, as if he didn't quite know how to manage the tension between us. He would say things like, "Mom doesn't mean anything by it," or, "You know how she is," as if those words were supposed to explain away her constant intrusion. I began to feel like I was in the middle of a tug-of-war, constantly being pulled in different directions. The weight of having to choose between standing up for myself and keeping the peace in my marriage became suffocating. I knew Ryan was torn between his loyalty to his mother and his commitment to me, but I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. I needed him to make a choice. Not just words, but actions. One evening, after another one of Grace's surprise visits, I found myself sitting in the living room waiting for Ryan to return from a quick errand. The house felt quiet, too quiet, and for the first time in a while, I felt completely alone. I couldn't shake the thought that nothing was really changing. His mother still had too much influence over him, and I still felt like an outsider in my own home. When Ryan came through the door, I didn't wait for him to settle in. I needed to address this before I lost my nerve. "Ryan, we need to talk," I said firmly, my voice steady, though my heart raced. He looked at me with concern, dropping his keys into the bowl by the door and walking over to where I was sitting. "What's wrong? You seem upset." "I am upset," I said, feeling the words rush out before I could stop them. "I'm upset because nothing is changing. You're still letting your mom dictate everything. She's still intruding into our lives, and you keep defending her." Ryan ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. "I'm not defending her, I'm just trying to keep the peace. You don't understand how difficult it is. She's my mother, and I don't want to hurt her feelings." "And what about me?" I snapped, my voice trembling with the weight of everything I had kept inside. "What about our marriage, Ryan? Am I supposed to keep letting her walk all over me? Am I supposed to just keep quiet while she undermines me every chance she gets?" He sighed, looking defeated. "I don't know what you want from me. I've tried. I've told her to back off. But it's not that simple. You don't know what it's like to have her in my life for so long, to feel like I'm walking a tightrope all the time." I stared at him, my anger mixing with my hurt. "I don't want you to choose between me and your mom, but if you don't start standing up for us, for what we have, then I'm going to have to choose for you. I'm not going to keep living like this, Ryan. I can't." His eyes widened, and for a moment he was silent, as though my words had struck him deeper than he had expected. "I don't want to lose you," he said quietly, almost as if he had just realized the severity of what he was facing. "I don't want to lose us either," I said, my voice softening. "But this isn't just about you trying. It's about you proving to me that you can make us your priority, that you can be a partner to me, not just a son to her." The room was heavy with the silence that followed. I didn't expect him to have an immediate solution. This wasn't something that could be fixed overnight, but I needed to know if he was truly willing to change, to put in the work that was required to repair the fractures in our relationship. "I'll do whatever it takes," Ryan finally said, his voice low but resolute. "I don't want to lose you. I'll talk to her again. I'll set boundaries. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right between us." There was a note of sincerity in his voice, but I still wasn't convinced. The past few months had been filled with broken promises and half-hearted efforts. I needed him to prove it, not just to me, but to himself. The following weeks were challenging. Ryan began to take more proactive steps to address the situation with his mother. He had several difficult conversations with Grace, explaining that our marriage needed space to breathe and that her interference was damaging our relationship. I could see the strain it put on him. He didn't want to hurt her, but at the same time, he realized that his own happiness depended on making things right with me. Grace, of course, didn't take it well. There were tears, accusations, and a lot of guilt-tripping on her part. She tried to make Ryan feel as though he was betraying her, as though he was being ungrateful for everything she had done for him over the years. It was painful to watch him struggle, torn between his loyalty to her and his desire to protect our marriage. But for the first time in a long while, he was choosing us, choosing me. One evening, after another heated conversation with Grace, Ryan came home looking exhausted. He slumped onto the couch beside me, rubbing his face as if trying to process everything that had just transpired. "How did it go?" I asked, my voice gentle. He sighed deeply. "It was tough. She's not happy about it, but I think she's starting to get it. She knows things have to change. I can't keep living in that dynamic anymore." I nodded, grateful that he was finally seeing the light. "I know this is hard for you, but you're doing the right thing." "I know," he said quietly. "I just wish it didn't have to be this way." "You don't have to apologize for it," I said, turning to face him. "You're doing what's best for us. We can't keep letting her dictate our lives. This is about us finding our own way." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time in months I saw something in his eyes. An understanding, a shift. "I love you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I'm sorry it took me so long to realize what was important." I smiled softly, my heart swelling with a mixture of relief and gratitude. "I love you too, Ryan. And I'm glad you're finally seeing it. I'm glad you're choosing us." In the weeks that followed, things began to settle. Ryan kept his word, setting clearer boundaries with his mother and making a more consistent effort to be present in our relationship. It wasn't perfect, and there were still moments of tension, especially when Grace pushed back. But we were learning how to navigate those challenges together. I didn't need him to be perfect. I just needed him to be honest, to be present, and to show that he was willing to fight for us. And in the end, that's exactly what he did. Our marriage wasn't magically fixed, but we had taken the first steps toward healing. A journey that would take time, but was worth every effort. As for Grace, she eventually accepted the new boundaries, though not without resistance. She didn't understand it fully, but she knew that Ryan was no longer the son who would bend to her every whim. She was still a presence in our lives, but she was no longer the force that drove a wedge between us. Ryan and I had survived the storm, and in many ways it had made us stronger. We had rediscovered what it meant to be partners, to communicate openly, and to prioritize each other. There would be more challenges ahead, of course, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace settling over me. We weren't just surviving anymore, we were building something new, together.